The Emmy behind him tips off what a big deal he is. John Vassallo is with us, spent many years at ESPN, also NESN, and was for 2 decades an executive with the worldwide leader. And he's going to talk about his story with us today. Currently, he is with the Tupelo Honey team, production, programming, development. Also, is part of a coaching business where they look at talent and elevate talent. He does that with Dave Miller, Jay Rothman, Straight Talk Feedback. You can follow that on Twitter at Talk Feedback. You can follow John on Twitter at John Vassallo. And John, you played such a humongous role in so many things in the history of ESPN. So we're going to talk about that, get deep into your story, and have a lot of fun. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor at Fox Sports Radio. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley, and this is the On to Something podcast. So John, when learning about your story, I find that you are a very charismatic, enthusiastic backpacker. And I'm wondering how you being a backpacker resembles in any way your journey in the business, and where you find some commonalities between what you've done in sports media over the years and you having such a thrill in climbing and being a backpacker.
Well, that's a great question. Great way to kick it off. And, I think there's actually a lot of commonalities. I think number one is humility, having a respect for your environment. Preparation certainly goes into it, being prepared. I think the third thing, knowing you never go into the wild alone, is caring for the people around you. And I think those three things really, you look at the intangibles between working in an organization, and being on your own, being able to be self-reliant and relying on people. There's so much. We could probably do a whole session just on those commonalities. So I think it's self-reliance, care and respect for the people that are either with you in the Grand Canyon or in the next office or in your office environment, and really being unselfish with regard to how you lead, what you want out of the experience, and really, learning about oneself, because that's really a journey that never ends.
Leadership is something that you've been behind for so many years as a coordinating producer with ESPN for over 2 decades. And we'll get a little bit deeper into this as the conversation rolls on, but talking about the big projects you've done from wrestling, NCAA wrestling and hockey and lacrosse and college football and the great outdoor games, World Cup, and the college basketball awards, Home Depot, all that stuff. But I wanted to dig a little bit further towards the beginning of your career, and even before you got to ESPN. And when you were in college, you studied overseas, and I believe it is now Serbia and Montenegro as far as what it is. And so I'm curious to know, what was it like being over there, and how did that experience play into your vision of your career and what it ultimately would turn into?
Well, I think, I find, without going down the wormhole of this, I find there's a lot of pressure put on current day college students to declare majors before they get there. I have a freshman at South Carolina who just entered. I have a senior there. And I found it very strange that in their conversations, in their applications, it was like, what are you going to major in? What are you going to major in? What are you going to major in? And I scratched my head, Bryan, and said, if somebody asked me what I was going to major in when I was a senior coming out of Westlake High School, I wouldn't have had any clue. So for me, college is about discovery. It's about throwing a lot of stuff out there, seeing what you get at. Certainly there are students who come out of high school that are laser focused on whether they want to be a doctor, lawyer, what have you. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I had the opportunity to go to what was then Yugoslavia in 1979 with a Balkan history professor at Hope College, Michael Petrovic. And I think that experience changed me. Okay. We talk about curiosity. We talk about pliability. We talk about relying on yourself and the people around you. My project was, how do people communicate over there? And how is that different than in the United States? And in fact, it was very different. So for me, just to go through an experience like that, which made me uncomfortable, which I had no clue what was going to bring, the future would bring, I think really heightened my ability to be self-reliant. It honed in my interest in communication, interpersonal communication, really, not the study of broadcasting and production and all that. And I preach to my sons and the young people who are in high school and in college to do a lot of different things. Okay. Take some courses that you might not even think you're interested in, because you never know what that route's going to take you. You got to be, as we all know, you have to be passionate about what you do, regardless of what it is. Because if you're not passionate about what you do, if you're doing something either the system is forcing you into, or parents forcing you into, or somebody's forcing you into, inevitably, you're going to be unhappy. So probably a broader answer than you were looking for there. But I just think, being comfortable, being uncomfortable for me as a college freshman at the end of my freshman year was something I look back on and I'm really proud that I did, and my parents encouraged me to do, because it really provided the gateway into everything else in my life that followed.
And we're going to touch on all that followed. John Vassallo is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley, and you can, of course, follow John on Twitter at John Vassallo. I'm on Twitter, Bryan Fenley, a national anchor for Fox Sports Radio. So one of the things that, even if you were well out of college, you've always seemingly, a common denominator for you, John, has been your major has been relationships. You've been majoring in relationships and understanding, forging them, and the power that they can have on your career and the positive impact that you have on others. And I look at all of your colleagues at ESPN, from guys like Quint Kucinich and Anif Sharaf, and they have amazing things to say about you. And I know that means a lot to you, and people don't just throw that stuff out there. But when a guy like Quint says that you're a father figure to him, when you realize that what you've done in this business, it's not just about putting out a great product, which is huge, but it's also, like you talked about, caring for those around you on a deep level. Why do you take it that far and really make sure that everybody, as you said earlier, it's not just about you, but it really is about the well-being of the ecosystem that you are around?
Well, I just think, caring for others is something that's instilled in you from an early age. I mean, there wasn't any project that came along at ESPN that I didn't thoroughly enjoy doing as a team, whether it was a part of the team, whether I was leading the team, whether I was an adjunct piece of it. I mean, there was a mantra at ESPN, there was really nothing we couldn't do together. And it's a tremendous organization that way. I mean, Quint, flatters me, Anish flatters me. All I was to those people is what they were to me: available, honest, direct. And that's really it. I think availability. I mean, I think, there's a common phrase about, like, the door is always open, right? The door is open, always open. Leaders, the door's open. No, it's you getting through the door. It's getting out on the floor, into the floor, talking to people, taking a genuine interest. Because I think, the leaders that I admire, who's some of the coaches you can, Tom Brands in college wrestling, who head coach of Iowa, the stuff I've seen of Dave Petramala at Hopkins when he was there, now at Syracuse, Dom Starzia. I had the fortunate chance to work with Dan Hawkins, who's now the head football coach at Cal Davis. Dan was an analyst for us in college football for a while. And the common denominator in being close to these people was they always were as curious about what you were doing as you might have been about what they were doing. Okay. And always available, always engaged. And I think, I had the opportunity a couple of years back through Paul Carcaterra and Paul Rabel to meet Bill Belichick. Okay. At a fundraiser he and Paul Rabel and Carc did at the NCAA Lacrosse Championship. Fortunate enough to have dinner with him and a number of people. And it just struck me how curious he was about everything. Like, just curious about, how do you televise lacrosse? Curious about this, asking questions. So you look at this guy, like, greatest coach, football coach of all time. What drives him and what drives some of these others, like Dan Hawkins, is this insatiable curiosity to learn not only about their own craft, but about others' crafts. And I love that. I love flying with my buddy TJ. I want to know about airplanes. I love backpacking. I want to know about that. I have a lot of interests and a lot of different, things that I like to pursue. And it's sort of ingrained in my nature. So I like to engage people at that level, and I like being engaged at that level. So, Quint, you brought up Quint's name. Quint's very much the same way. I mean, very curious about everything that goes on around him. Tremendous lacrosse analyst, outstanding reporter. He can do play-by-play. There's really nothing he can't do. Paul Carcaterra, very much the same way. People that I've been close to, that I've had the good fortune to lead. But I think that really is the common denominator in anything you do, whether it's TV production, sports production. That's what I try to instill in my sons. Just real curiosity.
John Vassallo is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. How does that genuine curiosity play into how you were able to build up brands like lacrosse and wrestling and sports like that on the NCAA level that usually aren't the mainstream? But in a way, if you look at your career, John, you've been a hype man and you've played such an integral role in the growth of these sports.
Well, I think, back to the word curiosity, I commonly had talked with people in the lacrosse community, and this certainly goes for wrestling, is we're still sort of figuring out how to cover it, right? Even though I think ESPN's got a tremendous blueprint on how to cover, and they cover the college game better than anyone else, is there's still a curiosity to say, hey, what if we move the camera here? What if we did this differently? There isn't the thought of, hey, we've arrived, we have the template, and we're going to just plop this template down on everything we do. I think the NCAA wrestling tournament was a tremendous opportunity. Okay, NCAA wrestling, we like to say, went from a 90-minute tape delayed show back in, I think it was 2000 or 1999, the first year I was fortunate enough to be assigned to the project, to now over 11 hours of linear coverage, every match on every mat covered. Huge social media effort. A number of years ago, we brought in Billy Baldwin, who wrestled in college in the state of New York, was a thorough wrestling fan. We brought him in to do some commentary. And I like to say with wrestling even as well, we're still sort of figuring it out. Do we use the jib in certain places for the final? How much are we on the handheld? How much should we be on hard cameras? So it's really an evolution. And I think if leadership stays curious, then I think everyone around you, producer, directors, PAs, APs, will sort of follow suit. And I think some of that was certainly what was the mark of a number of the projects you mentioned in the lead-in at ESPN, like Great Outdoor Games, certainly, and even back the 1998 Women's World Cup, which I had a chance to work on with another one, with one of your former stars on the Fenley deal, and Miss Amy Rosenfeld, who was a tremendous person to work alongside on that project for. So I think it's just like everybody into the pool, nobody higher, lower in a pecking order. I had some great mentors early on in my career at ESPN, who we'll mention probably later, but I think it's really, all about that, is not considering that you've arrived in any way, shape, or form, Yeah.
John Vassallo is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. One of the things that Amy has done so well is she's been such a pioneer and bringing exposure to sports that in the past didn't get as much. And she has just been able to be on the forefront of that. I see a lot of that in you. So I know you kind of touched on this a little bit, John, but when you think about some of the sports you mentioned, where for wrestling, it was just tape delayed, and where other sports might not have gotten the coverage in the past, where there had been this stigma that that's how it was. What was it like fighting for those sports, to go against the grain and to be in those war rooms, those production rooms, and say, hey, we're going to do things different, believe me, and to convince those around you that this is what we need to do, and then for it all to work out like that?
Well, I think first of all, the advent of the additional shoulder networks at ESPN certainly helped. I mean, ESPNU was launched in 2005, right? Prior to 2005, ESPN really didn't have a channel they could put a lot of the stuff on, right? Everything was sort of, if it wasn't ESPN or ESPN2, it really didn't see the light of day. It was before streaming, before ESPNU, before the advent of the college or the conference specific networks. So there certainly was buy-in from programming, right? I think they realized that there was an undermined content. And then I think there was great cooperation from the NCAA also that wanted some of these undiscovered gems, so to speak, televised. And then I go back to guys like John Smith at Oklahoma State, Tom Brands at Iowa, Barry Davis at Wisconsin, sort of saying, you want to try that? Try it. Not being scared, not having a protectionist attitude, but an expansive attitude. College wrestling is great, really, because many times the head coaches aren't in the corner during the matches. They're off mat, either on another match or in the final, even off mat with two assistants. So we stumbled probably 10 years ago on the fact that, hey, we could interview the head coach during the mat. And I'll never forget Quint Kesnick going over and tapping Wisconsin's Barry Davis on the shoulder while he was gyrating in the corner, watching his wrestler from afar and saying, Coach Davis, would you talk to us? What are you looking at here? And Barry Davis literally with Quint narrated this match. Our play-by-play and analyst laid out, and it was like gold TV, even to the point that the NCAA came running over after and said, hey, we're not supposed to talk to head coaches during action, but hey, you did it and it worked. And wait a minute, you shouldn't do it. Well, but maybe we should. Hey, it was gold TV. So I think those are some of the things I'm talking about, those barriers to break through, that if you don't try it, you're sort of never going to know. And we went to the well quite frequently with Coach Davis the next couple of years. But again, Quint was in the IFB to the truck. Hey, Coach Davis is here. Let's talk to him. Boom. And, you sort of do it and you sort of discover that way. I remember the first year we offset one of the cameras for the face-off for lacrosse. We call it the low attack camera now. And now everywhere you see lacrosse done, whether it's the PLL, college lacrosse, high school lacrosse, you see that low offset attack camera, because we certainly know that the face-off in men's lacrosse or the draw in women's lacrosse and possession really drives the boat partially in that sport. So I think that's just part of it, is creating a culture and an environment where experimentation is encouraged and not discouraged.
On that note, John, when you think about your legacy and how you want your peers to perceive you, how high up do you want them to know that you are, in fact, a barrier breaker?
Look, I want them to know that I encouraged them. I want them to know that they were heard. I want them to know that, like I said earlier, they were treated honestly. I created an environment that they could give honest feedback, that I gave honest feedback, that I was straight with people. I think, when I left ESPN in January of this year, the volume of people reaching out to you, at different levels, just to say, hey, what you did for me mattered, or that project we worked for mattered. I mean, those are the great things about, the experience, and certainly about the culture at ESPN. And, it was a great run. But as I said, curiosity now, it drives me toward a number of other things that have yet to be done and sort of mountains to climb. So I'm basking in those opportunities right now.
What do those mountains look like and what you want to climb in this future?
Well, I think, it's interesting. You work for a company as long, like I was at NESN 10 years before ESPN, then ESPN for 23 years. So you look back at your professional life and you're 33 years working for two organizations. Wow. Okay. And there's great security in that. There's great comfort in that. But you find yourself get into a little bit of a grind, right? Half the year was college football for me. The other half of the year essentially was lacrosse, wrestling, hockey. And then you go in the next 6 months and then the spring 6 months. And I think if there's something that the last year's shown me is that, eat your own cooking, practice what you preach. You want to learn more about yourself, get out there, right? There's a big world out there. And I think, fortunately, Kerry Glotzer and Greg Wiedekamp And John Cervisi gave me the opportunity to jump in with Tupelo literally weeks after I had left ESPN. And I think, working with Kerry on looking at new business, driving new business, is putting me in meetings and arenas that I would have never been in, staying in that production silo at ESPN. That wasn't my thing. So I've learned a lot about myself. I get up some days scratching my head, petrified. I get up other days like ready to attack the world. But hey, that's what's the juice about the situation. That's what drives you. Knowing that now I'm learning things about myself that, if I stayed at ESPN, I probably wouldn't be learning. So I think we're never too old. We're never too young to learn. We're never too young, never too old to throw some stuff at the wall, try it, do some things different. And I just don't think I would have this opportunity if I didn't leave.
That mindset that you're talking about is why you are priceless in this business, always challenging the status quo and always testing yourself, and doing that right now as you have moved on from ESPN. But if you look back at your years with the worldwide leader, what do you miss most, John?
I would probably, it's still relatively early. I'd probably say the people. I think, not being able to work shoulder to shoulder with Anish, Quint, Paul Carcaterra, John Kettering on the lacrosse side. I certainly miss the NCAA wrestling championship. But that's in great hands now with Nick Rude and the team there at ESPN. Spent a lot of time with Nick talking about, hey, this is this, that's that, watch out for this, watch out for that. I think it's really the relationships. Timmy Corrigan, who's the lead NBA producer there, played lacrosse at Notre Dame. He was always a great resource. When the phone rang and he had an observation, I was always like conditioned to pay attention. But I think, that's even the culture that, back at NESN, I think I mentioned this to you when we talked the other day. I was fortunate enough to work the period of time at NESN with Amy Rosenfeld, with Ed Placey, who's been at ESPN now, I think, close to 30 years, with Tom McNeely, who is out in the freelance world, worked at ESPN for a while. And to be able to have worked in that environment with those people, in Fenway Park, doing Red Sox, doing Bruins, doing Yankee Conference football, doing some of the college sports we did. It's a guy that I have to mention, who created that sort of environment for us, who was then the director of production and operations, Bob Whitelaw, who had a huge impact on my career at NESN. Essentially taught me how to direct baseball, taught me how to direct hockey, gave Ed, Tommy, Amy, and I and others huge volume of opportunity to go out there when NESN was really in its formidable years, launched in 84. We were there 86, 87 through mid 90s. If Bob didn't take a chance on us, we wouldn't be where we are. So you asked me how I learned to do it. I learned to do it because he trusted us. So I think, you largely in life mirror the opportunity and the behavior that people who've had an impact on your career mirror. And I think it's just, I've been fortunate enough to have a number of people like that in my career. Jeff Mason, certainly somebody, was really my first boss when I got to ESPN in 97, and taught us the value of hard work, taught us the value of the word we, not I. I'll never forget one of the first meetings at ESPN in 97. I got out of a meeting and I must have used the word I a couple times. And Mason, like a Marine sergeant, pulled me aside. I'll never forget where I was standing outside the elevator. And he came up to me, as only Jeffrey could, pointed in my chest and said, if you ever use the word I, and I'll tell you what, from that point forward, it has been no question. I don't even think that word's in the lexicon. It's like we. And I think Jeff had a unique way to deliver those messages, but you can darn well bet I think he saw something in me. And I think he saw something in the culture that he wanted to create there, and I think we've been better for it to this day.
Even though everything, like you said, and we're joined by John Vassallo, I'm Bryan Fenley, is due to the team, you can't help, I would think, as a human, to look at even just internally what you've done from an individual standpoint over your career, and not in any way to say that that's boastful or not, but how do you celebrate your personal successes, and who do you celebrate them with? And when do you allow, because you are very humble and very much a selfless player in all of this, but when do you give yourself some credit, which is deserved?
It's a good question. I probably don't do it enough. I mean, I think I'm proud of what we accomplished at ESPN. I'm proud of, the footing those sports have now, the team, the college football team that, Ed Placey, Steve Ackles, Brian Yarrow, the great production coordinators there. I mean, look, I'm very fortunate that I can do a lot with my time now. Don't miss a workout, take a lot of time to, first time in the fall that I've been able to take 2 vacations. One, a great trip to Montana, doing some backpacking and hiking, and another one with my wife to celebrate an anniversary. That would have never happened in the fall at ESPN, right? Because it's college football season. But I think it's a great point you bring up. I don't know that type A's like I am in this culture do that enough, right? I mean, we're not in this, it's not part of the deal. But so good question. Challenge me there with that one, Brian. I'm going to need to get back to you on that.
Yeah, please do when we do this again. But this is all back to how you challenge the status quo, and that, hey, maybe you allow yourself in whatever humble way to do that. You are a father, and you have worked, like you were talking about earlier, with camera setups and being innovative as far as covering games. What has it been like for you filming one of your son's games and what that looks like?
Yeah.
Growing up.
It's interesting because I had the opportunity to do and Phil Orleans hit me on this a couple months ago. I think he found it on the internet, but Consumer Reports, I don't know how they found me. I think one of the Anna Negrin or Kim Elclip, one of the PR folks at ESPN, called me one day and said, hey, Consumer Reports wants to do a story on how to film your son or daughter's game. and I'm like, yeah, so you're calling me? And they said, yeah, JV, will you talk to him? I said, sure, yeah, I'll talk to him. And, it was just like, some of the things we learned. Hey, vary the camera angles, how to story tell, get a soundbite or 2 from the kid before the game. Don't coach from the sideline. It's funny. You can probably Google Consumer Report, how to film or tape your son or daughter's game, and you'll probably be able to find it. But it was pretty funny because I learned a lot about what I wasn't doing through what I was preaching in some of those situations.
Yeah. So like for an example, like how would you separate yourself from that professional ESPN NESN knows the ways in which a broadcast is supposed to go on, and then you're limited by your son's game? And then the other thing is, what would your son say to you afterwards when watching this? What was his advice, or what was his feedback, or his reaction to seeing what you shot of him?
Well, probably the first thing they would say is your timing was bad, because I really didn't shine very well in most of the game situations. You know what I was doing, to be honest with you, Brian? I was probably one of the parents that wasn't filming during the games, because when they were playing club lacrosse or they were playing high school lacrosse, I just wanted to take it in, because obviously I was working a lot, so I wasn't at most of the games. One of the silver linings last spring, because I left in January, is I was able to see every one of my youngest son's lacrosse games his senior year in high school. But I did take a lot of stills, so I became the team still photographer, and I would take a lot of stills, put them up on a Google Photos link. But I found stills were better, I think, because when you hide behind the camera, you just don't enjoy the camera. And my camera work was bad because I was always peeking around. Whenever your son or daughter has the ball, you're never able to lock in well. And I always found the still photography was a more effective way to both capture the moment and also enjoy the game. So that's what I'd probably caution parents to do. Take stills, get a good camera, a good long lens camera, and those moments will be etched in time. And I find myself looking back on those pictures a lot more frequently than I would ever go back and pop a tape in or look at a link on a computer. Interesting.
It feels like when you look at a still, you have a story that comes with it. So you watch or you look at the still and then you sort of fill in parts of where you were. It's
Right.
sort of like a movie plays in your mind just by the still itself. I want to leave you with this question. John Vassallo is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. If you could put a still on a plaque and you only had one of your career so far, something that defines you, your legacy, your reputation, what you've done, what am I looking at in that picture?
I think unequivocally it would be the crew for the Home Depot College Football Awards. It was like, I think 2018, and we had a photographer there, and I was sort of a pain in the neck because I wanted to get a team photo. And I wanted Phil to take a team photo. And I have it on my screensaver, but it was a picture from, he took it from the balcony of everybody involved in the show, from our lighting people to the set people to all the technicians, the producer director. And as that comes up on my screensaver, I look at that team and I say, hey, that team defines my attitude. Team defines, I think, ESPN. And I think when I look at the smiles in that picture, I think everybody on that show felt empowered. And I think, that's probably the way I'd want to leave it.
So poignantly said there, John Vassallo, you have been empowering people over the course of your career, the teamwork, and you've been smiling along the way. You can follow John on Twitter at John Vassallo, also at Talk Feedback. Of course, he's with Tupelo Honey, and he is with Straight Talk Feedback. They do talent coaching. Encourage anybody who's interested to check that out with John, with Dave Miller and Jay Rothman. John, I'm Bryan Fenley. I really appreciate you doing this. This was a whole lot of fun.
Bryan, thanks so much for asking me. It was a lot of fun, and keep on doing what you're doing, because I think you're giving a great footing and a face to the many people in our industry that all make up the mosaic. Congrats on it. Thank you.